Captain Taman Park stood on the bridge of the UES Indomitable and watched the stars through the main view screen. The ship moved through space like a metal whale swimming through an ocean of darkness. Around him, the bridge crew worked at their stations with the quiet efficiency that came from months of deep space patrol. The human fleet had been out here for 3 months now, exploring the edge of known space and looking for signs of other life. So far, they had found nothing but empty star systems and dead planets. Some of the crew were getting restless, but Taiman knew that patience was the most important quality for any explorer. Communications officer Ji-Woo Kim suddenly straightened at her station. Her fingers flew across the control panel as she adjusted settings and filters. The look on her face made Taiman turn toward her immediately. "Something is coming in, Captain," she said without looking up from her instruments. "It's not from any human, ship or station. The signal is weak and broken, but it's definitely artificial." Taiman walked over to her station and leaned down to look at the readouts. The wave patterns on her screen were unlike anything he had seen before. They pulsed and shifted in ways that human technology did not make. "Can you clean it up?" he asked. Ji-Woo worked for several minutes, her brow furrowed in concentration. Slowly, the static began to clear and something else emerged. It was not music or speech, but it had a rhythm that suggested intelligence behind it. "Sir," she said quietly, "I think this is a distress signal." The bridge went silent except for the quiet hum of the ship's systems. Every crew member who could hear had stopped what they were doing to listen. In all of human history, no one had ever received a message from another intelligent species. "Put it on speakers," Taiman ordered. The sound that filled the bridge was haunting. It reminded Taiman of whale songs mixed with the kind of electronic music that experimental artists made on Earth. But underneath the alien quality, there was something unmistakably desperate about it. The signal repeated every few minutes with slight variations. Ji-Woo recorded everything and ran it through the ship's translation programs. The computer worked to find patterns and meaning in the strange sounds. Xenobiologist Hyun-Woo Lee arrived on the bridge within minutes of being called. He was a thin man with quick eyes who had spent his whole career hoping for exactly this moment. He listened to the signal several times before speaking. "The mathematical patterns suggest a base 12 counting system," he said. "If I am right about the frequency modulations, then this signal contains both linguistic and biological data. They are telling us who they are and asking for help." "How can you be sure?" Taiman asked. "Because desperation sounds the same in any language," Hyun-Woo replied. "Listen to how the signal degrades at the end of each cycle. That is not equipment failure. That is someone or something running out of power or time." Ji-Woo looked up from her station with wide eyes. "Captain, I have been tracking the signal source. It is coming from a star system about 23 light-years from here. Based on the signal strength and degradation, I estimate it was sent about 3 weeks ago." Taiman felt his heart rate increase. An alien civilization in distress, just 23 light-years away. The implications were staggering. He activated his communication link to Admiral So-Young Choi, who commanded the entire exploration fleet. "Admiral, we need an emergency council meeting," he said. "We have received first contact, and it's not what anyone expected." 2 hours later, the senior officers from all 5 ships in the fleet gathered in the conference room aboard the Indomitable. Admiral Choi sat at the head of the long table, her silver hair reflecting the overhead lights. She was a veteran of the Mars conflicts and had led more deep space missions than anyone else in the human fleet. The alien signal played through the speakers, while Hyun-Woo presented his analysis. According to his best translation, the message came from a species called the Vellani. Their homeworld was under attack by something they called the Swarm. They had already lost several colony worlds and their main fleet was being systematically destroyed, though. "Attackers appear to be some kind of machine intelligence," Hyun-Woo explained. The Vellani described them as relentless and adaptive. They consume everything in their path and use the resources to build more of themselves. The Vellani estimate they have perhaps 4 weeks before their homeworld falls. Commander Min-Ho Jang leaned forward in his chair. He was the fleet's chief tactical officer and naturally cautious about any military situation. "We know nothing about these aliens or their enemies," he said. "This could be a trap or a misunderstanding. We could be flying into a war that has nothing to do with us," but Captain Taiman shook his head. "The biological data in their signal shows they evolved on a low gravity world with a thin atmosphere. They are physically fragile compared to humans. Their technology appears advanced, but they have never developed serious military capabilities. They are peaceful scientists and explorers who have encountered something they cannot fight. So what? Are you suggesting? Admiral Choi asked. I suggest we respond to their distress call, Taemin said. It will take us 3 weeks to reach their system at maximum burn. If we leave now, we might arrive in time to help. The room fell silent as everyone considered the implications. This would be humanity's first contact with another intelligent species, and their first act would be to join an alien war against an unknown enemy. Min Ho voiced what everyone was thinking. We have 5 ships and 3,000 crew members. We do not know what weapons or defenses this swarm has. We could be sacrificing the entire fleet for aliens we have never met. Chief Engineer Bo Ram Song spoke up from the end of the table. She was younger than most of the senior officers but had earned her position through brilliance and hard work. The Volani signal contains technical specifications for their ships and weapons, she said. Their technology is impressive, but it focuses on efficiency and precision. They fight like computers calculating the best mathematical solutions. And how do humans fight? Admiral Choi asked with a slight smile. Like humans, Bo Ram replied. We adapt, we improvise, and we refuse to quit, even when the math says we should. That might be exactly what this situation needs. Intelligence Officer Woo Jin-yoon had been quietly studying data on his tablet throughout the meeting. Admiral, he said, I have been analyzing the pattern of swarm attacks based on the Volani reports. This enemy has been dormant for a very long time before recently awakening. It appears to be some kind of ancient weapon system that activates when it detects certain technological signatures. What kind of signatures? Taemin asked. The kind that advanced peaceful civilizations produce when they expand into space, Woo Jin answered. Radio telescopes, fusion reactors, quantum computers. The swarm appears designed to eliminate any species that reaches a certain level of technological development. The implications sent a chill through the room. If the swarm was programmed to destroy advanced civilizations, then humanity would eventually face it regardless of what they did now. Better to fight it alongside allies than to face it alone. Later, Admiral Choi looked around the table at each of her officers. The decision was ultimately hers, but she valued their input. The debate continued for another hour as they discussed logistic supplies and tactical options. Finally, she called for quiet and stood up. In all of human history, we have wondered if we were alone in the universe, she said. Now we know we are not, and our new neighbors are asking for help. I will not be the admiral who turned away from those in need. The fleet will respond to the Volani distress call, she announced. We leave for their system in 6 hours. All ships are to prepare for extended combat operations. This may be our first meeting with aliens, but it will not be our last as. The officers filed out of the conference room to prepare their ships. Taemin remained behind with the admiral. Are we doing the right thing? He asked quietly. She looked at him with the steady gaze that had seen her through decades of command. Time will tell, Captain, but I would rather die trying to help than live knowing we could have made a difference. Within hours, the human fleet had changed course and was burning toward the Volani system at maximum speed. Behind them, Earth grew smaller, until it vanished among the stars. Ahead lay the unknown and the first test of what humanity would become among the stars. The die was cast, and there would be no turning back. The human fleet raced through space faster than any human ships had ever traveled before. Chief Engineer Bo Ram Song pushed the fusion drives beyond their safety limits, knowing that every hour could mean the difference between life and death for an entire alien civilization. In the 3 weeks since receiving the Volani distress signal, the situation had grown worse. More transmissions arrived daily, each one weaker than the last. The swarm had consumed 3 more Volani colony worlds and was advancing steadily toward their home world. Bo Ram worked 18-hour shifts in the engine rooms of all 5 ships. She crawled through maintenance tunnels and recalibrated systems that were never meant to operate at such extremes. Her hands were burned from hot metal and her uniform was stained with coolant fluid, but she never complained. The engines can take this for maybe another week, she told Captain Taemin during one of their daily briefings. After that, we risk complete drive failure. But if we slow down now, we will arrive too late to help anyone. Intelligence Officer Woo Jin-yoon spent every waking moment analyzing the flood of data coming from Volani space. His small office had become a maze of printouts and display screens, showing star charts, battle reports, and tactical analyses. What he discovered kept him awake at night. The swarm was not just destroying Villani forces, it was studying them. Each attack showed evidence of adaptation and learning. Weapons that worked in the first battle were useless in the second. Defensive strategies that delayed the swarm one day were countered the next. Captain Taiman found Wu Jin staring at a holographic display that showed the progression of swarm tactics over the past month. The evolution was terrifying in its speed and efficiency. They learned from everything the intelligence officer said without looking away from the display. Every ship they destroy, every weapon they encounter, every defensive position they overrun, teaches them something new. By the time we arrive, they will have adapted to everything the Villani can throw at them, but they have never seen humans before. Taiman pointed out. Exactly, Wu Jin replied with a grim smile. That is our only advantage, and we can only use it once, Doctor. Yun Jihan worked with Wu Jin to understand the nature of their enemy. She was a strategic analyst who had studied every major conflict in human history. Her job was to find patterns and weaknesses that others missed. The swarm fights like a perfect computer, she explained to the senior staff during one of their meetings. Every decision is mathematically optimal. Every resource is used with maximum efficiency. They never waste time or materials on anything that does not serve their primary objective. Which is what Admiral Choi asked. Total consumption of resources followed by reproduction, Yunji answered. They are like a virus that infects star systems instead of living cells. They break everything down to its component parts and use those parts to build more of themselves. The briefing room fell silent as everyone absorbed this information. They were not flying toward a war in any traditional sense. They were heading toward an encounter with something that consumed entire civilizations as fuel for its own growth. Lieutenant Do-hyun Kang raised his hand from the back of the room. He was young for a tactical officer but had a reputation for creative thinking. Ma'am, what if their perfect efficiency is also their weakness? How so? Yunji asked. Perfect systems do not handle chaos well, Do-hyun explained. If something operates by pure mathematical optimization, then illogical actions might confuse it. Humans do not always make the mathematically correct choice, especially in combat. Admiral Choi leaned forward with interest. Explain. Well, humans have been known to charge machine gun nests to save their friends even when the logical choice would be to retreat, Do-hyun said. We make emotional decisions that computers cannot predict. We take risks that do not make mathematical sense but sometimes lead to victory anyway. Xenobiologist Hyunwoo Lee nodded in agreement. The Villani biological data suggest they are extremely logical creatures, he said. Their evolution favored intelligence and cooperation over aggression. They probably fight wars the same way they conduct scientific experiments with careful planning and precise execution. But humans evolved as predators on a Deathworld fleet, psychologist Hae-won Shin added. We are comfortable with chaos and violence in ways that peaceful species are not. That might be exactly what this situation requires. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent message from Communications Officer Ji-woo Kim. Admiral, we are receiving a new transmission from Villani space. This one is different from the others. The main screen flickered to life, showing a real-time communication from the edge of the Villani star system. For the first time, humans were seeing actual Villani beings, and the sight was both wonderful and heartbreaking. The Villani appeared tall and slender with pale blue skin that seemed almost translucent. Their large eyes held an intelligence that was unmistakably aware and afraid. The being on the screen spoke in their musical language while translation software provided subtitles. Greetings, unknown ships, the Villani said. I am Science Coordinator, Thalen of the Villani Republic. We have detected your approach and hope you are here in response to our distress calls. We have little time left before our world falls to the swarm. Admiral Choi stepped forward and activated the reply system. This is Admiral So-young Choi of the Human Exploration Fleet, she said. We received your distress signal and are coming to provide assistance. What is your current tactical situation? The relief on the Villani face was visible even across species barriers. Humans, she repeated as if tasting the word. We had theorized that other species might exist, but never imagined we would meet them under such circumstances. Our homeworld is under siege. The swarm arrived in our system 6 days ago and has begun systematic destruction of our orbital installations. How long can you hold out? Taman asked, stepping into view of the camera. The science coordinator paused to consult with others off-screen. Based on current consumption rates, we estimate perhaps 10 more days before our primary defenses fail, she said. After that, the planetary surface will be vulnerable to direct attack. The human officers exchanged glances. 10 days was cutting it very close, even if their engines held together for the remaining journey. We will arrive in approximately 72 hours, Admiral Choi said. Prepare whatever defenses you can, and try to delay the swarm advance. We are bringing capabilities they have not encountered before. What kind of capabilities? The Villani asked with obvious curiosity and hope. The kind that do not make mathematical sense, Admiral Choi replied with a slight smile. As the transmission ended, the bridge crew began preparing for what would be humanity's first interstellar battle. Weapons were checked and rechecked. Marines reviewed boarding procedures for alien vessels. Pilots ran combat simulations against theoretical swarm tactics, but it was the conversation with the Villani that had the biggest impact on human morale. Seeing the fear in those alien eyes and hearing the desperate hope in their voice had transformed an abstract rescue mission into something deeply personal. These were not just aliens, they were people with families and dreams who were about to die unless someone helped them. The fact that they looked different and spoke a different language did not matter. They needed help, and humans were coming to provide it. In the final days of their journey, more Villani refugees began fleeing their homeworld. Long streams of evacuation ships headed toward the outer planets, while their military forces prepared for a last desperate stand against the swarm. Chief Medical Officer, Jae-hyun Choi, prepared the fleet's medical bays for casualties, both human and alien. He had never treated non-human patients before, but figured that blood loss and trauma were probably universal concepts. The ship's workshops hummed with activity as crew members modified weapons and equipment based on what they had learned about swarm technology. If the enemy adapted to everything they encountered, then humans would have to stay one step ahead of that adaptation. As they entered the final hours of their approach to the Villani system, the fleet went to general quarters. Everyone took their battle stations and prepared for whatever they might find waiting for them. Through the viewports, they could see the glow of the Villani star growing brighter ahead. Somewhere in that system, an ancient evil was destroying everything in its path. But for the first time in eons, it was about to encounter something it had never faced before. Humans were coming, and they were bringing chaos with them. The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Villani system and immediately went to full combat alert. What they saw through their sensors defied comprehension. Thousands of alien ships moved through space in perfect, geometric formations. The swarm vessels looked like dark metal insects the size of skyscrapers. They moved with mechanical precision, consuming everything in their path and leaving behind empty space where thriving worlds had once existed. Captain Taman Park stared at the tactical display and felt his stomach drop. The scale of the enemy force was overwhelming. The human fleet had 5 ships, while the swarm had what looked like an entire armada. Communications officer Ji-woo Kim established contact with the Villani command ship that was retreating toward the outer system. The alien vessel looked beautiful and fragile compared to the angular brutality of the swarm ships. Its hull gleamed like polished crystal, but was scarred with weapon burns and collision damage. Admiral So-young Choi decided that first contact between species should not happen. Over a radio channel, she ordered Captain Taman to take a shuttle to the Villani command ship for a face-to-face meeting. Diplomatic attaché Kyung-soo accompanied him along with a small security detail. The shuttle bay of the Villani ship was unlike anything humans had ever seen. The walls seemed to be made of living crystal that pulsed with soft light. The air was thinner than Earth normal and smelled like flowers mixed with ozone. Everything was designed for beings much taller and more delicate than humans. Science coordinator Thelen met them at the airlock, and the first thing Taman noticed was how the alien moved. Every gesture was graceful and precise, as if Thelen was performing a carefully choreographed dance. The Villani were clearly beings who had never known violence or chaos. "You are much more robust than we expected," Thelen said through a translation device that made the musical Villani language sound flat and mechanical. Your species evolved under much harsher conditions than ours. We come from a world that tried to kill us every day, Kyung-soo replied. It made us hard to kill. The meeting took place in what humans would call a conference room, but which looked more like a garden. The walls were transparent aluminum, giving a clear view of the battle raging in the inner system. Swarm ships moved like schools of metallic fish while Volani defenders tried desperately to slow their advance. Thelen explained the situation with scientific precision. The swarm had awakened when Volani deep space probes accidentally activated one of their ancient monitoring stations. The machines had been dormant for millions of years, waiting for signs of advanced civilization. Once triggered, they began their programmed mission to eliminate any species that might eventually challenge. Their creators are long dead, Taemin pointed out. The swarm does not care, Thelen replied. They are weapons, not thinking beings. They will continue their mission until they are destroyed or until there is nothing left to destroy. Through the conference room windows they watched as another Volani defense station exploded under swarm assault. The aliens had tried everything they could think of, but the machines adapted to every tactic within hours of encountering it. That is when Taemin realized what made humans different. We do not fight like you do, he told Thelen. We do not calculate optimal strategies or try to minimize losses. We fight to win, and we are willing to pay any price for victory. What do you mean? The science coordinator asked. Humans are chaos, Kyung-soo explained. We make decisions that do not make sense mathematically. We take risks that logical beings would never consider. Sometimes we win battles we should have lost simply because we refuse to accept defeat, as if to demonstrate his point. Alarms began blaring throughout the Volani ship. The swarm had detected the human fleet and was sending scouts to investigate. These were smaller ships designed for reconnaissance and fast attack. There were only 20 of them, but they moved faster than anything in the Volani Fleet Wing commander. Sang-Ho Park launched his fighters before anyone gave him an order. He had been listening to the tactical channels and knew that speed was more important than protocols. His pilots flew toward the swarm scouts in a loose formation that would have horrified any military academy instructor. The first engagement between humans and the swarm lasted exactly 4 minutes and changed everything. The human pilots did not fly like Volani, who favored careful positioning and measured attacks. They flew like maniacs. Sang-Ho led his squadron directly into the center of the swarm formation and then broke in all directions. His fighters corkscrewed and rolled through space, making attack runs that defied three-dimensional logic. When one pilot ran out of missiles, he rammed his fighter into a swarm scout and then ejected at the last second. The swarm scouts tried to adapt to human tactics, but there was nothing to adapt to. The humans were not following any recognizable pattern. They were improvising in real time and making it up as they went along. Marine Captain Jin-Young Lee was monitoring the battle from the troop transport when he noticed something important. The damaged swarm scout was still partially functional, and he had an idea that would have been rejected by any sane commander. He ordered his Marines to suit up for a boarding action and launched them in assault pods toward the crippled alien ship. The pods hit the swarm vessel like hammers and cut through its hull with plasma torches. Within minutes, human Marines were fighting their way through the interior of an alien war machine. What they found inside defied everything they thought they knew about the enemy. The swarm ships were not just machines, they were something like living computers. Every surface was covered with circuits and processors that pulsed with data flows. The Marines could not understand the technology, but they understood how to break it. Jin Young and his men went through the swarm scout like a wrecking crew. They smashed everything they could reach and planted explosive charges on anything that looked important. The ship began to malfunction as its distributed intelligence network suffered cascading failures. The other swarm scouts detected the distress signals from their damaged unit and moved to assist. But they had never encountered an enemy that would board their ships and fight hand-to-hand in the corridors. Their programming had no response protocols for such an irrational tactic. Tactical Officer Yu Jin-bei watched the battle from the Indomitable and began to understand what made humans dangerous in space combat. The Volani fought wars like they conducted science experiments with careful planning and logical execution. The swarm fought with perfect mathematical efficiency, but humans fought like the predators they had evolved to be. They were opportunistic, aggressive, and utterly unpredictable. They would sacrifice their own lives to achieve victory in ways that no computer could calculate. The first skirmish ended with all 20 swarm scouts either destroyed or captured. The human casualties were light considering the odds. More importantly, they had learned something crucial about their enemy. The swarm was powerful and adaptive, but it had one critical weakness. It could not handle true chaos and unpredictability. Every action had to be processed and analyzed before a response could be formulated. Humans could act faster than the machines could think. Admiral Choi used the communication system to address both the human fleet and the Villani defenders. "The enemy has never faced anything like us before," she announced. "They are programmed to fight logical opponents who follow predictable patterns. We are going to show them what happens when an illogical species goes to war." Thelen listened to the human plans with growing amazement and horror. The tactics they described violated every principle of civilized warfare. They were brutal, inefficient, and completely insane by any mathematical standard. But they might actually work. The main swarm fleet was still hours away from the Villani homeworld, but the humans had bought them precious time with their first victory. More importantly, they had proven that the seemingly invincible machines could be beaten as both fleets prepared for the larger battle to come. Captain Taman looked out at the stars and wondered what humanity was becoming. They had traveled to the stars to explore and discover new wonders. Instead, they had found themselves in the middle of an ancient war that would define their place in the galaxy. But there was no turning back now. The swarm knew humans existed and would eventually come looking for Earth if they were not stopped. Here. This was not just about saving the Villani anymore. This was about survival. The Deathworlders were about to show the galaxy what they were truly capable of. Word of the human fleet's victory over the swarm scouts spread through Villani space faster than light itself. For months, the gentle aliens had watched their civilization crumble under the relentless assault of an unstoppable enemy. Now, suddenly, they had Hope Admiral So-Young Choi established a joint command center aboard the Villani flagship, where human and alien officers worked side by side. The cultural differences were immediately obvious and sometimes dangerous. What humans considered normal tactical planning, the Villani found almost barbarically aggressive. Colonel Rena Kwan attempted to train Villani soldiers in human combat techniques, but quickly discovered the limitations of their physiology. The aliens were taller and more graceful than humans, but their bones were hollow like birds, and their muscles were designed for precision rather than power. "You cannot fight the way we fight," she explained to a group of Villani officers who had volunteered for combat training. "Your bodies were not built for the kind of violence that humans call normal warfare. But that does not mean you cannot contribute to the battle, instead of trying to turn the Villani into human marines." Rena worked with their engineers to develop new weapons and tactics that combined human aggression with Villani precision. The results were unlike anything either species had created alone. Jae-sung Kim was a former Special Forces operator who had become the fleet's chief weapons specialist. He spent days working with Villani technicians to create hybrid systems that could deliver human-style chaos through alien technology. Their breakthrough came when they realized that Villani energy weapons could be overloaded to create unpredictable effects. Instead of the steady, precise beams that Villani normally used, the modified weapons would discharge in random bursts and frequencies. The beams would change color power level and targeting pattern in ways that even the human operators could not predict. It was exactly the kind of controlled chaos that might confuse swarm adaptive systems. Meanwhile, fleet strategist Ye-Jin Moon worked with Villani tactical computers to analyze the main swarm force approaching the homeworld. What she found was both terrifying and encouraging. The enemy fleet consisted of thousands of ships in perfect formation. Each vessel was exactly where mathematical optimization said it should be for maximum efficiency and mutual support. The formation was beautiful in its geometric precision, but it was also predictable. "Humans do not fight in perfect formations," Ye-Jin explained to the Joint Command staff. "We fight in what military historians call organized chaos. Every unit knows the overall plan but adapts to local conditions in real time. The swarm will not know how to respond to that kind of tactical flexibility." The plan she developed was insane by any logical standard. Instead of trying to match the swarm's precision, the human-Villani alliance would embrace complete chaos. Every ship would operate independently, making decisions based on immediate circumstances rather than predetermined strategies. Junior engineer Dongwoo Seo contributed the final piece of the puzzle when he suggested using human nature itself as a weapon. Humans from Earth were adapted to survive in conditions that would kill most other species. Their homeworld had taught them to thrive in chaos and to see opportunity in disaster. What if we turn their homeworld experience into a tactical advantage, he asked during one of the planning sessions. The swarm expects rational, predictable responses to their attacks. What if we respond the way humans would respond to a natural disaster on Earth? The idea was brilliant in its simplicity. Humans had survived ice ages, volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, and countless other planetary catastrophes. They had learned to adapt, improvise, and overcome obstacles that should have destroyed them. Those same survival instincts could be applied. To space combat, Subin Yang volunteered to lead the most dangerous part of the operation. She would take teams of human infiltrators aboard swarm ships using the same boarding tactics that had worked against the scouts. But instead of just causing damage, they would plant special devices created by Villani engineers. The devices were designed to introduce random errors into swarm communication networks. They would not destroy the ships immediately, but would gradually corrupt the data flows that coordinated the enemy fleet. Over time, the perfect mathematical precision that made the swarm so effective would degrade into confusion and chaos. The main battle began when the swarm fleet reached the outer edge of the Villani star system. The humans had positioned their ships in a seemingly random pattern that violated every principle of space combat tactics. The Villani vessels were scattered throughout the human formation in positions that made no mathematical sense. Admiral Choi gave the order to engage, and the chaos began immediately. Human ships accelerated toward the swarm formation from dozens of different angles. Some flew straight at the enemy while others curved around in spirals that seemed designed by madmen. Fighter squadrons broke formation and attacked individual targets without coordination or apparent strategy. Wing Commander Sang-Ho Park led his pilots in what he called a swarm attack against the swarm. Each fighter chose its own target and attacked using whatever weapons and tactics seemed appropriate at the moment. Some pilots used missiles while others preferred energy weapons. A few simply rammed their fighters into enemy ships and ejected at the last possible second. The swarm tried to respond with mathematical precision, but found itself facing an enemy that refused to follow any recognizable pattern. Every time the machines calculated an optimal response, the humans would change tactics and do something completely different. Marine Captain Jin Young Lee launched boarding pods toward the largest swarm vessels while the space battle raged around them. His Marines cut through alien hulls and fought their way into the mechanical intestines of enemy ships. They planted Subin Yang's devices and then retreated before the swarm could coordinate a response. But the real breakthrough came when the modified Villani weapons began firing their chaotic energy bursts into the swarm formation. The beams changed, color and intensity randomly making it impossible for the machines to calculate defensive measures. Some shots missed their targets completely, while others struck with devastating accuracy. The swarm formation began to lose its perfect geometry, as individual ships were forced to maneuver to avoid the unpredictable weapon fire. Ships that had been positioned for maximum mutual support found themselves isolated and vulnerable. The beautiful mathematical precision of their formation degraded into something resembling a brawl. Captain Na Young Choi commanded the destroyer, defiant, and found herself facing 3 swarm-heavy cruisers that had broken away from the main formation. The logical response would have been to retreat and call for support, but logic had nothing to do with human combat instincts. Instead, she ordered her ship directly toward the enemy vessels at maximum speed. Her weapons officer fired everything they had while the engine crew pushed the fusion drives beyond their safety limits. The Defiant struck the lead swarm ship like a guided missile, and both vessels erupted in a ball of plasma. Na Young ejected in an escape pod just before the collision and was recovered by a Villani rescue ship. Her last transmission before abandoning ship was heard throughout both fleets. Tell them the Deathworlders never quit. The battle raged for 6 hours across 3 different star systems as both fleets maneuvered and fought in ways that had never been seen before. The swarm tried desperately to restore order to their formation, while the humans continued to introduce new variables into every engagement. Slowly, the tide began to turn as the infiltration devices planted by Subin Yang's teams started to take effect. Swarm ships began receiving contradictory orders and targeting data. Some vessels fired on their own allies while others simply stopped responding to commands altogether. The perfect coordination that made the swarm so dangerous was breaking down, under the assault of random errors and conflicting information. For the first time in their existence, the machines were experiencing something like confusion. Admiral Choi watched the tactical display and realized that they were actually winning, a battle that should have been impossible to win. The swarm still outnumbered them 10-1, but numbers meant nothing if the enemy could not coordinate their attacks. The final phase of the battle began when combat engineer Seung-Hwan Yu managed to infiltrate the swarm command ship. Instead of trying to understand alien technology, he simply started breaking everything he could reach. Every circuit he cut and every processor he smashed introduced more chaos into the enemy network. The swarm command structure collapsed as cascading failures spread through their fleet. Ships that had fought with mechanical precision for millions of years suddenly found themselves unable to process basic tactical data. The perfect killing machines had been reduced to confusion by the simple application of human stubbornness and ingenuity. When the swarm fleet finally retreated from Villani space, they left behind something unprecedented in their long history. They had been defeated not by superior technology or greater numbers, but by an enemy that refused to fight according to logical principles. The victory came at a cost. The human fleet had lost 2 ships and hundreds of crew members. The Villani had sacrificed thousands of their own people to buy time for the evacuation of their homeworld, but they had proven that the seemingly unstoppable swarm could be beaten. The aftermath of the battle left both human and Villani forces struggling to understand what they had accomplished. Admiral So Young Choi stood in the observation deck of the Indomitable, looking down at the blue and silver world that had almost become another dead planet consumed by the swarm. The Villani homeworld was beautiful in a way that reminded her of Earth, but seemed more fragile somehow. The continents were covered in crystalline cities that sparkled like jewels in the sunlight. It was hard to believe that this peaceful world had almost been destroyed by ancient war machines. Science coordinator Thelen joined her at the viewport, and for several minutes they stood in comfortable silence watching the planet turn below them. The alien had learned enough human customs to understand that sometimes words were not necessary. "Your people saved our entire civilization," Thelen finally said. "We do not have adequate concepts in our language to express the depth of our gratitude. You would have done the same for us," Admiral Choi replied. "That is what civilized beings do for each other." "But would we?" Thelen asked quietly. "The Villani have always prided themselves on logic and careful reasoning. What you did was completely illogical by our standards. You risked everything to help strangers, with no guarantee of success or reward. That is what makes us human," the Admiral answered. "We do not always make the smart choice, but we try to make the right choice." The victory over the swarm had cost both species dearly. Captain Na Young Choi was recovering in the medical bay along with hundreds of other wounded crew members. 2. Human ships had been destroyed outright, and a third was so badly damaged it would never fight again. The Villani losses were even heavier, with dozens of ships destroyed and thousands of their people dead. But the cost could have been so much worse. Intelligence reports suggested that the swarm had been planning to consume the entire Villani star system before moving on to other targets. The machines had been building new ships and expanding their fleet with resources stolen from conquered worlds. Left unchecked, they might have become unstoppable. Captain Tae-min Park was working with Villani engineers to understand the technology recovered from destroyed swarm vessels. What they found was both fascinating and terrifying. The machines were incredibly ancient, possibly millions of years old, and built by a species that had vanished long before humans had evolved. The swarm builders had been afraid of something, Tae-min explained to the Joint Command Staff. They created these machines as weapons to eliminate any species that might eventually threaten them. But they made the weapons too perfect and too autonomous. The swarm outlived their creators and kept following their original programming even. After there was no one left to give them new orders, xenobiologist Hyunwoo Lee had been studying biological samples recovered from ancient swarm databases. The data painted a picture of a galaxy that had once been full of intelligent life. Dozens of species had reached the stars only to be destroyed by the machines they encountered. "We are not the first species to face the swarm," he reported, "but we may be the first to defeat them and survive." Every other civilization in the database was eliminated completely. The machines were designed to leave no survivors and no trace of the cultures they destroyed. The implications were staggering. Humanity and the Volani were living in a galaxy that was essentially a graveyard. Countless civilizations had been wiped out by the same enemy they had just defeated. The ancient builders had created a weapon that had sterilized entire regions of space, but the swarm was not completely destroyed. Intelligence officer Wu Jin estimated that perhaps 10% of their fleet had escaped the battle and retreated to unknown regions of space. The machines would rebuild and adapt, learning from their first defeat. When they returned, they would be even more dangerous. That is why we cannot rest on this victory, Admiral Choi announced to the assembled officers. The swarm will be back, and next time they will know what to expect from human tactics. We need to find them before they can fully recover, and we need to finish what we started here. The Volani Republic immediately offered to share all their technology and resources with humanity. Their scientists worked around the clock to help human engineers understand advanced alien systems. In return, humans shared their tactical knowledge and combat experience with Volani military forces. Colonel Rina Kwan established the first joint military academy where human and Volani officers would train together. The curriculum combined human aggression and adaptability with Volani precision and technological sophistication. The graduates would form the core of a new kind of military force designed specifically to hunt down and eliminate swarm remnants. But the most important development was the message that Admiral Choi sent back to Earth. Her report described not just the victory over the swarm, but the discovery that the galaxy was full of civilizations that needed protection from ancient threats they could not handle alone. The response from Earth was immediate and overwhelming. Within months, a dozen new exploration fleets were launched toward different regions of space. Each fleet carried the same mission that had brought the Indomitable to Volani space: find civilizations in need and offer whatever help was required. Combat. Engineer Sung Hwan Yu volunteered for the most dangerous assignment of all. He would lead a team of specialists aboard a captured swarm vessel back to the machine's original territory. Their mission was to find the source of the swarm and destroy it permanently. It was a suicide mission by any reasonable standard, but Yu and his team accepted it without hesitation. If we do not find their base and destroy it completely, he explained to Admiral Choi, then everything we accomplished here will be temporary. The swarm will rebuild and return stronger than before. This is our chance to end the threat permanently. The modified swarm ship departed Volani space with a crew of volunteers from both species. They carried enough firepower to destroy a small moon and the determination to finish what the ancient war had started. No one expected them to return alive, but their sacrifice might save countless future civilizations from the same fate that had claimed so many others. Meanwhile, Captain Taemin Park received new orders from Earth Command. He would take the surviving ships of his fleet and continue exploring the galaxy, looking for other species that might need human assistance. The Volani would provide guides and translators, while human forces would provide the military capability to face whatever threats they encountered as the human fleet prepared to leave Volani space. Thelen presented Admiral Choi with a gift from the Republic. It was a crystal pendant carved from materials found on the Volani homeworld. The crystal contained microscopic records of their entire civilization, including their art, music, literature, and scientific discoveries. If humanity ever faces the same threat that almost destroyed us, Thelen explained, then this crystal will ensure that some memory of our people survives. We trust you to carry our legacy with you among the stars. Admiral Choi accepted the gift with appropriate ceremony, but privately, she was determined that no such precautions would ever be necessary. The swarm would be hunted down and destroyed before it could threaten anyone else. That was not just a promise to the Volani, but a commitment to every species that might exist in the vast darkness between the stars. The final scene of humanity's first interstellar war took place in orbit around the Volani homeworld, as Captain Taemin Park's fleet prepared to depart. Volani ships formed an honor guard, while human vessels tested their repaired systems and prepared for the long journey to unknown regions of space. Through the viewports of both fleets, the crews could see the blue and silver world that had almost been lost to ancient madness and mechanical hatred. The planet continued to turn peacefully in its orbit, unaware of how close it had come to complete destruction. But now it was safe, and the galaxy was a little less empty than it had been before humans arrived to answer a distress call from strangers who needed help. The Deathworlders had found their purpose among the stars not as conquerors, but as protectors standing guard against the darkness that threatened to consume everything in its path. As the human fleet jumped to faster-than-light speed and vanished into the cosmic void, Admiral Choi made a silent promise to the galaxy itself. Humanity would keep exploring and keep fighting until every ancient threat was eliminated, and every species that needed help had received it. The stars were vast and full of dangers that most civilizations could never face alone. But they were no longer alone because the children of Earth were coming to stand with them against whatever nightmares waited in the dark spaces between worlds. The age of human guardianship had begun.